Hello, brothers and sisters. And I will continue to read the extract. And I just send my prayer to our friends, to all of you, and to the pioneers. And behold, on May 9th, 1974, during a beautiful session, the entity named Campus said these words to us: "You are witness of these talks. You see and hear things that other creatures have sought for a lifetime without ever achieving. You who have made a kind of a habit on the unusual, the phenomenon, the extraordinary fact outside the usual laws of nature. You must ask yourself at this moment, what you do. Is the fear of talking about spiritism, and therefore put in a certain sense, really the real reason that makes you be cautious and prudent towards your fellow man? Or isn't it rather a form of laziness, of not wanting to commit, of not wanting to work? Since Christ has been told about this evening, a parable comes to mind. The parable of talents that perhaps would suit some of you well. Think. These students, graduates, scholars, young people in general who have preparation, who have seen and touched these phenomena with their own hands, heard these things, who can write, make articles, why don't they do it? We have always been against the forms of organization, and we confirm this. But each one individually, for his part, speaking without citing the source, with all the precautions of the case, that he should not make a fool of himself. How many times could he talk to his neighbor and help him and he doesn't do it? But why doesn't he do it? Whatever the reason is a wrong reason. Believe it, brothers. Then we had no more doubts, told Mr. Zoe Alachevich. We sent our 3 books to the Parapsychology Information Center in Napoli, directed by Prof. Giorgio Di Simone, receiving a flattering review. Encouraged, we began to write articles and send them to the magazine Gli Arcani in Milano, which published them from 1974 to 1977. We described how the contribution took place. Now we had some at every session. On what occasion they took place. We told anecdotes of spiritual identifications. But we also managed to include pieces of teaching, and the strange thing is that those very ones that struck the attention of the readers of the magazine, who sent letters of sympathy and requests to know more about this teaching. In the meantime, we had to give our group All done. I'm sorry. I repeat now. I'm sorry. I lost the track. I repeat this part. We had to give our group a name, so much so that we could catalog the messages and phenomena we were talking about as coming from the same source. The first article was sent in the summer of 1974, when there were no sessions and we couldn't ask the guides how to call us. For a number of reasons, we decided to call our group Cerchio Firenze 77. 7 is the fundamental number of the module of our cosmos. So the guides had told us Roberto, Luciana, Cerchio Firenze are 7-letter words. Our last name is Setti. The 5 of us of the family were born in days with the number 7. Roberto on November 7th, Ruggero on September 27, Mom on January 17, Dad on July 17. Unexpectedly, then, our first book, published by Edizioni Mediterranee, was released in November 1977. Roberto's medianity lasted 37 years and 9 months. With the publication of the articles, many people asked to participate in our sessions. Fortunately, since 1973, the session took place in my house, a small house near Florence that my husband had built in the liquidation of Enel. Quiet, in the middle of the green, it was the ideal place for this kind of experience. And then I could take turns inviting new people without disturbing friends who until then had offered their home. How many important people have taken turns in the vast room that hosted our sessions? Now they took place only once a month, but they were very demanding, both for the physical phenomena and for the contents of the messages of the entities, which alternated for many years now. Dali, Kempis, Claudio, brother, Oriental brother, that means Easter brother, Teresa, Lily, Alan, each with its own particular way of teaching, some in a mystical key, some in an ethical or philosophical or analytical key, each with its own particular voice that has remained the same over time. The contributions took place at every session, sometimes with the light on, but almost always in the dark, with slow materialization. Between the luminous hands of the medium, the entity that presides over this phenomena, Michael, invited the closest people to touch the objects in the various phases of materialization, and then perfumes, rains of olive leaves, rose leaves, and intact roses, levitation of the medium, wandering luminosity. In 1975, through the articles on the Arcani magazine, we met the psychicist of Genoa, Dr. Alfredo Ferraro, who has since participated for 4 years in each of our meetings. He wrote beautiful articles describing the method of the contribution and documenting the materialization with photographs taken during the sessions while the contribution was in formation. Encouraged by the letters from the readers of Gli Arcani magazine and by the enthusiasm of the new people we admitted to our meetings, we decided to publicly print what we had collected until then. Our first book, From the Invisible Worlds, is a remark of privately printed books with the titles Meeting and Talks, and the second, Beyond Illusions, is the book synthesis with the addition of some lessons from 1977. Even the book had a vast echo. I remember with sympathy the enthusiasm of the late proof, Giulio Cogni, expressed so well in his preface to the book Beyond Illusion. I have many beautiful letters from people who say they benefit from reading texts, who say that they have had their lives changed in their understanding of certain truth, that they no longer feel alone, that they want to read more messages. Of course, there were also requests to participate in a session or to become part of the circle by paying a registration fee. They had a hard time believing that in reality there was no real circle, nor a real headquarters or an organization with statutes and regulations, contribution or participation fees. But we had never thought of creating such things in obedience to what the masters had told us. Organizations, laws, moral, or religion's commandments are necessary to prevent the individual from performing those acts that little evolution can lead him to perform. Subsequently, when the spiritual evolution of maturation of the individual is such that we would no longer commit acts of violence to comply with his selfishness, even if there were no formal prohibitions, organization lost their meaning. They are good for human conquest, for what man cannot achieve individually in terms of social goals, but they are contrary to the very spirit on the truth of teaching when they are constituted and founded with the intention of making the individual evolve. Those who approach a spiritual organization with the aim of evolving themselves, of reaching a goal, in fact, do not do nothing but indulge the process of expansion of the self. Truth is a conquest of the individual. We ourselves do not pretend to bring you the truth. We can only give you indications. We don't come to brutality, followers of a label. If anything, we come to destroy everything that inhabits understanding, racial, moral, religious, social subdivisions, and so on. Everything that prevents you from approaching your fellow human beings and understanding them. If the truths you know prevented you from meeting those who don't think like you wouldn't have understood them. And it's you who have to understand. No one can do it for you. Now that the books existed, the task of choosing who to admit to the sessions was easier. In fact, there was no longer a risk of letting in people intrigued only by the physical phenomenon or eager to have answer to their personal questions. By now, these who approached us knew the depth of the topics covered and were aware of witnessing something other than a normal spirit session. How many young people now regularly come or gather with each other to reread the messages and discuss them? And this was a source of great joy for Roberto, who, until then, had been surrounded by people of a more mature age than his. By now, the whole group was beginning to be old in every sense. Many dear friends have left the physical floor, and it was comforting to see young faces around us. In the fall of 1978, Roberto began to have a certain weakness in his legs. Until then, he had never suffered from the slightest disorder. Even after the session, he felt great and was not tired. After all, there were never more than 8 or 9 sessions through the year, since from June to October we only met to talk to each other and reread the messages. He had a perfect physique and showed much less than his 48 years. Sometimes his shy and respectful way of doing things to the point of scruples gave in awe and could give the impression that he did not want to open up completely. But those who needed his words and his presence know how broad his availability and capacity for love was, of an impartial love and so little possessive, even towards us closest relative, that was sometimes incomprehensible to us. In fact, his affection and understanding gushed only at our request, without ever prevaricating and without ever demanding attention for himself. He liked the work of the municipality of Florence very much, and his work environment it was very appreciated. In his spare time, he dealt with electronics, listened to music, read. Sometimes he went to the movies with Corrado and to friends of the circle. But most of all, he loved to be quiet at home. Even for the holidays, he chose places with little confusion and with few friends. It was very surprised by the kind of life he led and told him, "If I were a free young man full of charm like you know how I would like to go to dance parties, go to fashionable places, make long trips." And he laughed at this desire to have fun that I had left, even though I was now a somewhat mature lady. Dad has passed aside and Mom had come to live with me in Geppetto. She could no longer take care of the house, and I was happy to have her with me. Roberto often came to lunch at my place, and in August he spent a few days with us. I would have liked to have it even more often, but Roberto was full of respect and was always afraid of disturbing. We never knew what were the things that really pleased him or those that he did not please us. Not that he did to please us. Pardon me. We never knew what were the things that really pleased him or those that he did to please us. The fact is that he tried to wait as little as possible on other, and since his mother was not well, he did all the things that the woman could not do by the hour. We received many letters and answered them all. Those with difficult questions I passed to Roberto or asked him what he had to answer. It was nice to work together, to be interested in the same thing. But now it seems to me that the older brother was him, so wise and so far-sighted. The session continued to be beautiful. By now the people who participated regularly were more than 60, and we had to divide the listening group into 4 shifts. That is to say that each group was not able to attend more than 2 sessions a year. At each session, we admitted 2 or 3 occasional observers, chosen among the dozen and dozen of people who requested it. In addition, every Saturday we received people who wanted to meet us and talk to us. Yet someone still claimed that we were a closed circle. I remember with particular nostalgia that evening of January 20th, 1979, which was supposed to be the penultimate of the old-fashioned session. More than 20 people were present in my Bolzano, in my house in Ceppetto. That was the evening dedicated to friends outside Florence. In fact, these pres- those present came from Genova, Bologna, Bolzano, Siena, Modena, and Roma. Three psychics were present: Dr. Alfredo Ferraro, Dr. Gianmarco Rinaldi, Prof. Luigi Stringa, lawyer Claudio Schwarzenberg, Professor Giulio Cogni, Mrs. Linda Bradley, Prof. Leo Magnanio, the Prof. Amendo Rotondi, our editor Gianni Caronico of the Mediterranea, Silvio Ravaldi, and Mr. Riccardo Cesanelli, and Mr. and dear friends Dr. Paola Giovetti. Our second book, Beyond Illusion, had just come out and we were happy about it. It was really beautiful and we commented on it together, all sitting in a circle on the sides of an armchair on which Roberto was sitting. Then, as usual, we read some passages from the previous session to create an atmosphere of recommend, turned off the light and waited in silence. The trance happened almost immediately, announced by Roberto's rhythmic breathing, almost a yoga breathing. The first to intervene was Dali. As always, his initial speech was in function of the thought of this present. That time, among other things, he said, to understand us, you must be willing to forget your conviction, and then compare them with our messages, when you are really sure that you have understood its meaning. Otherwise, if you immediately discard what contradicts your belief, you will never be able to fully understand what we want to mean. Immediately afterwards, the guys in charge of physical phenomena, Michael, materialized in the luminous hands of the medium as small objects that he delivered to Prof. Luigi Stringa, saying to him, "See, he's about to take the jump." We then saw that it was a frog in silver and colored stone. To Mr. Lina Bradley, daughter of Dr. Gastone De Boni, an Indian silver anklet was materialized, a singular and delightful object, worked with a tunnel and with a fringe with very small slopes. Campi's speech was very long and beautiful. It is reported on page 1993 of our fourth book, The Great Truth. He focused on the philosophical meaning of the theories of relativity and ended with these words. If scientific discoveries progressed hand in hand with the correct interpretation of phenomena, you would witness the progressive dissolution of all closed systems, and you would understand every perception of reality is an image, and as such is incomplete and inaccurate. In the world of perception, scientific discoveries are always true and only by approximation. Reality, in its essence, is unattainable. But this does not mean that man must turn his attention and believe that only what he perceives and which perceives it is true and existing, but he must give him the measure of his size. This, after all, is also the philosophical meaning of the special and general theories of relativity. Everyone present was impressed by the clarity of the exposition of the concepts, the impeccable literary form and the perfection dictionary. The impeccable literary form and perfection dictionary. I will say in passing that all the messages we report on our books have not undergone the slightest manipulation on our part. The entities have always had a fluent way of speaking, without errors or interruptions, and a perfection of a language worthy of most captivating speaker. After the session, we stayed a little longer to talk to Roberto, who, waking up from the trance, wanted to know what had happened. His was a complete trance and he didn't realize anything. Only then, from the magnetophone, could he follow everything that had happened. We photographed the contribution with the Polaroid before the people for whom they were intent took them away. Everyone told their impressions, and Roberto listened with interest to the expression of wonder that the lights, the perfumes, the contribution, the very contents of the messages had aroused. We were still serene that evening. Roberto's disorder did not worry us. The doctor had made him perform various tests, but nothing had come, and with the treatment of pills against asthenia, it was hoped that everything would pass. So we greeted each other happy for the beautiful thing we saw and heard, and for having been united in experiences that few are given to live. In the days that followed, Roberto had less and less strength in his legs. Twice, while walking along the stretch of road that separated him from the bus stop in Piazza Duomo to the headquarters of the municipality of Florence in Piazza Signoria, he felt his knees bend halfway. At the February session, we decided to suspend the sessions for fear that trance would damage Roberto. We communicated it to Dali and also asked him for information about Roberto's illness. With his sweet voice, he answered us, "As you wish, dears. But remember that it would have been criminal on our part to use Roberto if this were to harm him. I heard your questions, children. You see, dear ones, you are in life to have experiences, and experience is not simply a set of action in the human world, in the physical world, but, as you well know, it is accompanied by a much more important work, perhaps, than the action itself, which is represented by the various emotions, by the various thoughts, by fears, by joy, by all those that are in the intimate movement that each of you has experienced. For this to be felt and understood, man does not know his future, because evidently, if he knew it, many experiences would become repetitions, action in themselves without all that emotional part of pathos that I mentioned before. That's why sometimes we can't say anything. We can't reassure you or encourage you. This one of these times, dear ones, so I hope you won't want it. There are things that we ourselves cannot cannot transgress. I hope that each of you within yourself will find the answer to this question. For our part, we can only leave our instrument alone for until it has passed this moment. There are many things you can reflect and meditate on. We have always told you that we come above all not to console you, but to instill in you the strength to react and face the problems of your life. How many times have we read this message, trying to interpret the right meaning between the lines, waggling all the moments of suspension that Dali had, sometimes giving an optimistic, sometimes discouraging interpretation. In March 1979, Roberto had the joy of a beautiful evening of presentation of the book Beyond the Illusion, organized by the publishing house at the Croce bookstore in Rome. We went to Rome with several friends from our group. It could have been a happy day for everyone, but we were saddened by the fact that Roberto couldn't climb the train steps. And even the road from the hotel to the bookstore cost him a lot of effort. The bookstore was packed. The official speakers were Prof. Giuliano Cogni, Prof. Vincenzo Nestier, Dr. Alfredo Ferraro, who talked about the contents of the book. Prof. Emilio Servadio and Mons Corrado Belducci talked about the paranormal phenomena in general, also in response to Piero Angela's famous television broadcast that had denied and blocked the existence of the phenomena. There were several interventions from the audience and several questions. Roberto followed attentively, sitting on the back of the room, always shy and modest. He didn't want to make himself known. Early in the morning, he left for Florence with Corrado and other friends. He didn't feel comfortable outside the house and was afraid of limiting our plans. Me, my son, my sister-in-law, Franca, and other friends were staying in Rome until the afternoon. We were invited to lunch by Prof. Amedeo Rotondi, who had baptized our first book, From the Invisible Worlds. We promised to return to Rome with Roberto as soon as he recovered. Even in Rome now, he had many friends who want to meet him and who often met in the Rotondi bookstore in Via Merulana to listen and comment on the recording of our sessions. But the legs were getting weaker and weaker. Roberto was then hospitalized in the neurological wards of the Carreggi Hospital in Florence. Directed by Prof. Amanducci, other series of tests were performed: lumbar puncture, electromyography, EEG, etc. But nothing turned out. A diagnosis of polyneurosis was made. Another period of hope, waiting for the numerous prescribed treatments to have a result. But Roberto walked with increasing difficulty, and the neurologist from Florence advised to take a biopsy of the leg nerve at the neurological department of the Verona hospital. He accompanied Roberto to Verona, and I stayed with him the whole time of his hospitalization. I remember with gratitude the kindness of Dr. Gaston de Boni, all the courtesies that Roberto had in that hospital, the visit of our friends from Bologna and Brescia. Prof. Rizzuto performed a biopsy of the nerve, did other tests, all the negative. Roberto was discharged with a diagnosis of polyneuropathy and with a certain optimism about the outcome of the disease, or so it seems to us. What distressed him most about his illness was having to be burned to other and see his autonomy limited, that privacy of his, that had allowed him to live his normal life, despite the extraordinary phenomena of his medianity, was affected. That freedom in the little things, more theoretical than real, that he knew how to enjoy, was reduced enormously. For 14 months we got together just to talk to each other. and reread the lessons. In the meantime, Roberto and I were preparing the third volume, putting together certain messages from Master Claudio that were on the books, encounters and conversations, and that we had not put in the previous book. In April 1980, Roberto's trance started again, spontaneously. Sometimes they took place in the presence of three of our friends, and we could all only listen to the recordings. It was the beginning of a different way of conducting the sessions. In June 1980, two new friends joined the Cerchio Firenze 77, François Brossard and Pietro Cimatti. The first was a friend of the other dimension. It is the only entity of which the identity of the last incarnation is known. His demonstration is really fantastic. On June 19th, 1980, I went to Roberto's in the early afternoon because he had told me something extraordinary. As he said, we were preparing our third book and we had already put together several transcripts of Claudio's lessons and other messages received after the reading of the book Beyond the Illusion, giving a certain logical order to the topics and diving them by chapter. The entire file containing these pages, which practically already constitute the entire volume, had been put on the desk in Roberto's studio on the evening of June 18th. In the morning, Roberto had gone to the office, and until the afternoon, he had not gone to his studio. When he had sat down at the desk to take a look at the work done together, he had found the arrangement of certain chapters changed, with small correction and addition between the lines with Dali's calligraphy, well known to us, when he presented himself writing and when he had correct. Through Roberto in Trance, the book edited by Nella Bonora. We have never said all this. It seemed far-fetched after all the phenomenology of this mediumship, while falling within the canons of the great medianities of the past, may seem implausible to those who do not accept that there are other dimensions besides the physical one. At home with Roberto and Corrado, there were two other friends, Giuliana and Fabrizio Manneschi. All five of us were enthusiastic about examining the changes made to the layout of the pages on the transcript, which was in fact more fluid. Suddenly, we felt an intense smell of violets, a phenomenon that characterized the beginning of an extemporaneous trance. Roberto lay down in an armchair, and we sat around him. It was sunny outside, and even with the shutters down, we couldn't get completely dark, because a lot of light filtered through the sides of the large tree-glass window. Roberto had a scarf put on his eyes, stopped like a blindfold behind his head, because when he was in trance, even a tiny thread of light made his eyes blush. We had prepared the record, but the voice of the physical guide, Michael, begged us to have a camera. Corrado broke away the chain and went to get what requested. The only camera already equipped with film was the Polaroid. He returned to the room with the camera, and Michael made him kneel in front of Roberto, with the camera point towards his face. Practically, Corrado remained in the middle of a small circle formed by us in a chain. Roberto, however, had his hands free, because Giuliana and Fabrizio's hands, who were at his sides, were resting on his back. We had been able to see everything well because our eyes, now accustomed to the twilight, distinguished everything well. Michael invited us to stay focused and mentally recite the Our Father. When I tell you, snap, he said to Corrado. So it was done. At the explosion of the first cardboard, Roberto took it in his hand. At a distance of a few seconds from each other, some photographs were taken. To our great amazement, because with that little light, the Polaroid could not have worked without a flash. Then the entity announced, "That's enough. It's a series of photographs. Only the fifth is complete. Please show them to your friends and guests, but don't post them. It's Francois." Roberto woke up from the trance, asked if there had been a message. We were tense and anxious to see what had come. We told Roberto everything while we pulled up the shutter. We took the photos that the guide had placed on the shelf of a nearby piece of furniture. We looked stunned. I remember that in some volumes of spiritism, spiritism, I had seen certain medium photos reproduced. I was struck and made doubtful by that cotton-like mass that was seen around the images. Well, I had the same thing in front of me, but I had seen how this miracle had been produced, how the photos had been taken, how in front of the lens there was only Roberto's face in dim shadow with the blindfold in front of his eyes, while now we had in front of us the clear photograph of an unknown face with marked features, intense gaze, and a thick beard, surrounded by a kind of cotton cloud. In the first photographs, you can only see the white ectoplasm, with an opening in the middle from which the image of a somewhat blurred face appears, gradually more and more evident. In the fifth, the face is clearly visible and on fire. In a subsequent brief trance a few days later, it was made clear to us that Francois was an occult doctor at the time of the French Revolution and had also been a doctor in Napoleon's army. Seeing that Francois began to appear at our sessions with a pleasant and powerful voice, with a slightly French accent. He answered all the questions about Kempis' last lessons that were very difficult. From time to time, he gave some new about his past life. For example, he said that he had lived in Udine for 10 years as director of that hospital when Napoleone dominated Italy, that his parents had been killed, and other things for which we could ascertain that it was Francois Brosseau, a well-known personality in France. In Paris, a friend of ours obtained two photographies of Francois, written in French, in which we found confirmation of all the information that Francois had given us about himself. Since 1980, Francois had been the entity that more than any other has entertained amongst us. As I have already mentioned, the actual teaching was given about once a month, with the intervention of either Kempis or Dali or the Eastern Brother or Claudio. Sometimes the Venetian master has also manifested himself, who had never shown up in previous years. Roberto suddenly went into a trance in the presence of 2 or 3 friends who started to record, and we all followed the teachings through the recordings. In addition, every Saturday evening, Roberto met his friends in his house. It can be said that now the fixed circle of 7 or 8 people was formed by the most recent friends. However, 4 or 5 observers were admitted to try to satisfy the request for participation that came to us continuously. Francois always manifested himself in the sessions, announced by the scent of violets. Dali intervened with a brief greeting or an exhortation. a prayer, a blessing. Every now and then, instead of Dali, Teresa intervened with the scent of roses and her sweet words of love. What was never lacking was Michael's magical intervention, with intense brightness that sometimes illuminated Roberto's entire face and with his mysterious gifts upwards. Between the mid 1980s and the end of 1983, more than 100 objects were brought in. Although the importance of the contribution is certainly not in their instinct value, it is undeniable that it aroused a certain wonder that they were often objects in gold and stones, or otherwise in silver, bracelets, chains, coins, pins, small crosses, various pendants. Roberto kept going to the office, but in the afternoon he was free and received friends and those who wanted to meet him. His illness, instead of closing him into himself, had made him even more available to others. He first believed that people were only interested in meeting him when he was in session, or that they were only interested in the messages of the entities. But the people he received in the house showed him their affection and declared that it was extremely important for them to know him also as a man, and that from the conversation with him they felt reassured. Dear Roberto, they came to tell of their sorrow, and he had encouraging words for everyone and never talked about his sorrows, since the number of people who want to get in touch with us was constantly increased. From April 1980, we began to hold a monthly public meeting at which people from outside Florence also participated. It was moving to think that they drove miles and miles to train or car to hear the recorded messages and to have a dialogue with us. Roberto was always present, sitting amongst others. He wished he could invite everyone together to a session. And 3 times the incredible thing happened. He went into a trance in the public room that hosted us, and Francois manifested himself by giving clarification or explanation and addressing words of affection to everyone present. In March 1981, we present our third book, For a Better World, with the preface of Pietro Cimatti, who had become a great friend of Roberto since their first meeting in June 1980. The dear and late friend's proof was present. Giulio Cogni, Dr. Paola Giovetti, and in addition to Pietro Cimatti himself, our editor Gianni Canonico. With the publication of this book, other people added to the ranks of these who wanted to meet with us. Several expedients were devised to satisfy as many people as possible who appreciated this message. How many times did Pietro Cimatti, in his 11 p.m. radio calls, ask questions to Francois, who through Roberto's availability in a trance answered existential questions with great wisdom. Other times, groups of friends from Torino, Brescia, Lamezia Terme, after 10 p.m. called Roberto on the phone and asked questions about the teaching. I don't think other mediums have ever been able to make themselves available to everyone like Roberto, and so selflessly just to give joy and hope. Since February 1981, Roberto only moved with a wheelchair and continued to go to the office accompanied by Corrado by car. He came to my house in Ceppetto to meet with my mother, who had no peace to see him like this. On that occasion, we met all of us closest friends in the room that had been the scene of wonderful evenings, and we still hoped that one day everything could start again as before. Roberto continued to treat himself. The tests were still good, and hope left us longer. In July 1981, our dear, sweet, adored mother left us suddenly, without suffering. How empty my house seemed to me now. Roberto's almost didn't come anymore because, increasingly limited in his movements, he didn't feel comfortable outside his house. Unfortunately, in the last 3 years, Corrado had also worsened from his diabetes and had gone into a coma several times. Many dear friends have taken care of them for a long time and never left them alone. I would like to remind them all one by one. Roberto gave a lot of love, but he also received a lot. Probably, like every human being, Roberto appeared different to each of those who approached him, but each one cannot not have noticed his deep respect for others. That was a characteristic of his being. The miracle of which he was the instrument never chased to amaze him, nor did it accustom her to the extraordinary so much so as to make him accept everything without the shift of his reason. For friends who did not know his median skills, he was a serene companion who knew how to always be present with his benevolent humor and his availability. Respect of his social commitments he did not escape. In the ascetics, his being a man and citizen, 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 sorry, citizen, even if his work colleagues were a friend capable of fulfilling his commitments without a spirit of rivalry or ambition. For us family members, it was an irreplaceable point of reference, a comforting and pleasant presence that aroused and radiated unconditional love. And without this tangible presence, life seems less beautiful to us. During these last years at intense media activity, we had published two other books. One in November 1982 entitled The Great Truth, and the other in November 1983 entitled The Voice of the Unknown, accompanied by three cassettes with the voices of the seven circle instructors. In the volume The Great Truth, the part curated by his friends Pietro Cimatti was particularly successful, in which he reported many questions that the participants in the session addressed to Francois. Obtaining clear and exhaustive answers, knowing of this success, Roberto had begged Cimatti to include another series of Francois' answers in the volume that would contain the messages of 1982-1983. Unfortunately, in this volume, the space we had to dedicate to Francois was taken from Roberto's biographical notes, but the project is only postponed. The seventh volume of The Circle, entirely edited by Pietro Cimatti, will be Francois' book with his wise and patient answers to all of our most desperate questions, answers that alone constitute an accelerated course of esoteric truth. Of course, it will be hard to get used to doing without the conversation with Francois, to teachings of the masters, the meetings with the reassuring presence of Roberto. Those meetings that we thought would continue for so many years. Now that I think back to what was, it seems impossible to me that I never suspect that Roberto could leave us. I, who had never paid much attention to horoscopes, had believed in what the affectionate astrologer friends had done for him. Everyone agreed that Roberto would be healed. But perhaps all this optimism was induced precisely because we did not create an atmosphere of sadness around Roberto. He would certainly have captured. Francois Bossois, as a doctor, had his own theory. The patient, even the one who may seem the most prepared, must never know the severity of his illness. And the test continued to be good. However, the doctor who followed him had understood that the type of sclerosis that is not visible from the analysis, but that is inexorable was now clearly emerging. The last help Roberto could have was to pass so gently before his physique destroyed its future. He was never a whole day in bed. Until the last, he received his closest friends sitting in his wheelchair, always neatly dressed, because he never allowed himself to receive in pyjamas or robe. In the last meeting on February 25th at his house, he wanted us to ask the guides for permissions to resume the materialization of the contribution in training with the very sensitive camera that Corrado had just bought, so I could see something too, he said hopefully. But that Saturday the entities didn't show up. On the morning of February 29th at 8:40, Corrado called him, surprised that he was still sleeping. She was in a relaxed, serene, positive position, his eyes closed. No, her eyes closed. She never walked up between us. With Roberto's beloved voice, many other voices have gone out. Farewell, sweet Dali, strong-willed and wise Kempis, mystical Teresa, severe Claudio, oriental brother with a musical voice, convincing Venetian, fabulous Michael with magical gift, joyful Lily, courteous Alan, and very much appreciated friend Francois. It was sweet to get together to wait for you, but we would have gladly given up on your friendly voice just to have Roberto with us for so many more years. But healthy, serene, I pay for having done his job. Instead, altogether, he was silent. Now it's silence. To all the friends who have known him remains the memory of Roberto as a man, always available but reserved, sweet but firm in his principles, smiling but with a background of melancholy in his eyes, modest but full of dignity, sincere but always careful not to hurt. I have the sweet and poignant memory of a tender, affectionate, understanding brother, to whom I was deeply linked first by an almost maternal affection, then by the common experience and interest in the ways of knowledge that his medianity gave us. I am aware of the fact that 100, 1,000 Kempis and Dali and Lily and Roberto will appear in every part of Italy. But don't leave it, spirits friends, if we tell you that for us, close relatives and close friends of Roberto. Media communication have carried out the task for which they exist, which is to awaken our inner being. Now we want to move forward alone, with the immense baggage of the teachings we had in recent years, and with the certain that Roberto and all his disembodied friends are with us. We cannot expect to continue a dialogue that was right to have a term, a dialogue that was deeply enriched us and for which we will never thank enough those who want it for us and those who have become a docile instrument for a lifetime without even asking anything for themselves. Luciana Campani Setti, the sister of Roberto Setti. So, I just finished, and I really want to say thanks for all of you that have listened and tolerate my very bad reading, but is difficult to read on the screen for me. And I wanted to share to the English world about Roberto Setti e Cerchio Firenze 77. I really hope the love, wisdom, energy, and light of his friend, of him, and all the circle uh, can touch our hearts. And I really, I really feel very peaceful, serene within myself. So thank you so much.